this is understandable politics. Hello, the USA is losing influence in the world, and we cannot allow this. This is how the new report from the RAND Corporation for the Pentagon begins, alarming for the American hegemon. The research organization deals with forecasts and analysis of the global situation. The substantial report is nearly 100 pages long, with graphs, charts, and subpoints. Essentially, it's a portrait of modern America, or rather, its politicians. And it's a very bloodthirsty portrait. What conclusions did the Commission on National Interest Protection come to? Let's figure it out together. And what are the main goals of the White House? We provide only the facts. You draw the conclusions. Russia is a chronic and resurgent threat. The headline alone is enough to understand that friendship or even pragmatic diplomacy is not considered in overseas offices.
Russia demonstrates the ability to adapt to Western aid to Ukraine to achieve its goals. If Russia gains control over Ukrainian territory, its sphere of influence, including Belarus, will extend from the Arctic to the Black Sea. This will require additional human and military resources from NATO. The only option at the moment is to continue supplying Ukraine with weapons to prevent Russia's leadership in the region.
Note that Belarus is also mentioned in the strategic document. The answer, as we see, for the USA is 1. War and more war. And the goal, as we see, is 1. Let's repeat the report's quote, to prevent Russia's leadership in the region.
In principle, the White House has never hidden this, starting the game with Russia on the Ukrainian training ground, pumping Ukraine with weapons. The report explicitly states, why does the USA need war? America is losing its influence as a hegemon, losing positions in the world. Its economy is collapsing. External debt is growing. Companies are falling apart, and the population is impoverished. That is why wars are needed to distract from the previously mentioned problems. This has historically been the case.
By the way, the Commission on National Interest Protection and experts call for increasing the U.S. military budget to $1 trillion a year. An unheard of figure. The appetites of the military-industrial complex, record holders for interventions and invasions of sovereign states, look especially impressive compared to other countries.
China's military budget for 2024 is $231 billion. Russia's is $118. Washington has already invested $886 billion in the military in 2024. Moreover, the Commission claims that Beijing and Moscow's figures are significantly underestimated. Where RAND Corporation got this information is unknown. America is a state that produces war. Throughout their modern history, more than half of their budget has consisted of military-industrial complex expenses. This is the main product they produce. It is the largest employer in the world. More than 3 million people are involved in serving the American military-industrial complex.
We are already used to Russia and China being mentioned together in U.S. reports. Washington is greatly affected by these countries' unwillingness to dance to the Star-Spangled Tune.
China and Russia are major powers seeking to undermine the positions and influence of the USA in the world. Beijing is becoming the leading challenge for Washington. Armament, a strong economy, and the intention to achieve global leadership are unacceptable. And the partnership without limits between China and Russia, backed by cooperation with Iran and North Korea, directly hinders U.S. international interests.
Let's decode this. Moscow and Beijing cannot take on the role of regional leaders because the USA wants to be the leader everywhere. A wonderful understanding of freedom and democracy. And then we blame all our competitors and don't hold back in our expressions. The RAND Commission adds in the text, "The program of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, a partnership without limits, is nothing but the formation of the axis of evil of the 21st century."
This rhetoric is supported by the U.S. Democratic presidential candidate Kamala Harris. American media claim that if the politician wins the election, a major war with Russia and China is only a matter of time.
But Donald Trump, on the contrary, says he will bring peace and harmony. He claims, give him the presidential chair, and everyone will quickly start getting along. Experts agree on one thing: pre-election populism.
Those who hope for deals with the USA under Trump, or at least more constructive relations, are mistaken. The Trump factor will not significantly change the structure of Russia-West relations. Essentially, Moscow should not care who will be the U.S. president. The figure of the White House head is unlikely to play a major role in Russian-American relations.
But let's return to the report. The Commission highlights Taiwan separately. Yes, the region that the USA is carefully trying to detach from China, and judging by the experts' words, Washington will not leave peacefully.
The United States must consider China's intention to invade Taiwan by 2027. The invasion will have global significance for the American economy, as many U.S. logistics and trade chains in the region are tied to Taiwan. Washington needs to prepare for war either with the soldiers already in the region or by preparing additional immediate response resources. The Department of Defense must allocate resources. A short-term war on Taiwan will bring the global economy a loss of $5 trillion.
A 2-year conflict doubles the losses. Again, these are specific figures made in the USA.
The situation remains very dangerous because, of course, the USA can escalate this story, provoking China into a certain conflict. And I think the main red line here will be any moves towards recognizing Taiwan as a separate country, violating the 1979 China-US deal, or even moving towards increasing its political autonomy outside of this official recognition. All this is perceived in Beijing very painfully and, accordingly, can serve as a major provocation for active actions.
But it's not just about Taiwan. The abbreviation AUKUS, the Asian version of NATO, has somehow disappeared from the media. It consists of the UK, Australia, and, of course, the USA. The main goal is the Pacific region. And now we know that for the next 5 years, Asia will be noisy, at least from the construction of American military infrastructure in Japan and South Korea, Washington's military vassals.
On January 9, 2024, the Japanese government approved the expansion of the American presence. Construction of a military base for American forces began in the city of Naga. The project amounts to $6.5 billion. Thus, the number of bases in Japan will reach 94. That's 50,000 U.S. soldiers.
Let's add dozens of U.S. military facilities in South Korea. Especially notable is Camp Humphreys, a facility for 30,000 soldiers. And let's not forget about nuclear submarines for Australia.
In Asia, Taiwan faces years of delays in arms deliveries from the United States worth billions of dollars, mainly due to restrictions in American legislation. But AUKUS represents one of the most significant strategic opportunities for the United States to help Taiwan.
If we talk about specific defense alliances between the USA, Japan, and South Korea, this will indeed be a more serious story, because certain guarantees are given here. Plus, real-time intelligence sharing, plus rearmament programs for Japan, both with their own developments and what they buy from the Americans. And here, I think that indeed the Pentagon strategy at the moment, in case of escalation around Taiwan, is to use Japan as a battering ram in a conflict against China. So essentially, Japan is destined to be the Asian Ukraine.
We've already talked about the astronomical budgets of the US Army. The American economy sometimes seems bottomless, but that's not quite true. Printing dollars non-stop is also not easy. RAND specialists write directly the following.
Congress must immediately approve additional military funding and industrial base renewal. Funding should also support U.S. allies in wars. Shipbuilding requires significant investments. It's also important to increase the speed of military construction.
Money is important, of course, but who will fight if needed? In 2024, the Pentagon reduced the Army by 24,000 people. The reason is a lack of qualified personnel. The figure is small for a 1.5 million strong army, but the trend is dangerous. Pentagon research showed that only 23% of Americans meet the minimum physical and mental requirements for military service.
Another problem for the American Army is the reluctance of young people to serve. The U.S. Navy has been unable to fill its ranks for several years in a row. This has been greatly influenced by racist scandals and senior officers' abuse of power.
Naturally, this negatively affects the social environment, and these racist scandals are related to the fact that the old officer corps and sergeant corps face a multicultural, not always well-educated soldier contingent. This leads to numerous conflicts, hence the active efforts of American propaganda and the state to mitigate all this. By the way, this partly explains the popularization of women's service in the Army, as there is indeed a certain shortage.
How to fix the situation? RAND suggests using social networks, propaganda videos on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter for recruitment.
The story of a little girl from California raised by two moms. I needed my own adventures, my own challenge. I found it. A way to prove my inner strength. I am U.S. Army Corporal Emma Mellonlord, and I found my calling.
In the end, we get the main problem, the economy. The national debt has exceeded $31 trillion. Inflation in the USA is at 3%. Therefore, loans for Ukraine, Taiwan, Israel, and other partners will only increase. Will the average American live better? RAND answers this in the same report.
At numerous meetings with American politicians, the Commission concluded that polarization within American politics directly harms the U.S. economy and defense. Bipartisan support for the military is weakening, and the American public considers the wars in Ukraine and Palestine foreign. It's important to convey to people the idea of the importance of U.S. global leadership, for which they can endure the costs associated with their usual civil and economic life.
But how to change when you've been bringing grief and blood to dozens of countries all your life? When you have millions of deaths and ruined lives, devastation, and huge flows of migrants on your hands? When you constantly barbarically take resources and brazenly interfere in others' affairs? And essentially, the report didn't reveal anything new to us. Americans will continue to profit from tragedies. Americans will continue to use their favorite formula. If you're not with us, you're against us.
RAND claims that the USA is ready to conduct 3 prolonged wars through allies and is already doing so. In Ukraine, the Middle East, and preparing for war in the Asia-Pacific region. How and who profits from war is no longer a secret. Loans are given for the purchase of weapons, equipment, and military goods along with training, with corresponding conditions, interest rates, land, resources, influence on politics, and so on. Therefore, the Bank Military-Industrial Complex Department of Defense USA linkage works like clockwork.
Once again, everything you heard today is written in black and white by the Americans themselves in the report for the Pentagon. If after this, anyone still doubts who the main aggressor on planet Earth is, then you probably shouldn't watch political programs.
Of course, this reflects the current realities that diplomacy doesn't work. Yes, even intelligence agencies often fail to meet their needs. And the world is sliding into an unstable situation with many regional conflicts. Therefore, behind many of these conflicts are the United States, either directly or indirectly. This is the objective reality, and the RAND Corporation fully reflects it. The fact is indeed that Americans are preparing for these regional wars to expand, including with their participation and, so to speak, under their leadership.
However, it is impossible to endlessly destroy everything around, and the geopolitical ring has closed. Washington, accustomed to living at the expense of other countries, considering the global situation, the strengthening of Belarus, Russia, China, and other threats to the USA, is now forced to dig deeper into its own pocket. Let's conclude with a final statement from the report.
The growing U.S. budget deficit poses a direct threat to national security. Therefore, additional security spending must be accompanied by the introduction of additional taxes and cuts in social spending.
In general, ordinary Americans, be prepared to sponsor defense giants. Your money will go to the billion-dollar accounts of arms dealers. Admit it, there's little positivity for the population. Another conclusion from the report: obviously the hegemon is ailing, and looking up to it with puppy-like devotion as many countries do is a weak strategy. Not to mention respecting oneself as politicians of their people and their country, which wants and should live by its own mind. And for this one needs courage, which many leaders today sorely lack. Goodbye.